Now, let's say, for example, you found a set of documents that you could know with certainty were like a Q. They would say, oh, the Gospels are written from a common document that was used prior called the Q doc. I don't think that's the case. I think Q is simply the oral tradition. It's the tradition of people who said it the same way for 20 years and then wrote it down. And that's the common frame of reference. Those are the common details that everyone recited over and over again. So, for example, I noticed that when I'm talking about certain evidences for God's existence, I say them the same way that Frank does, Frank Turek. And it largely is because we kind of developed this idea, some of these ideas together, speaking publicly. And now he'll talk about the same 3 motives for murder that I talk about the same way. I'll talk about some of his stuff the same way. So what happens is you end up repeating. Now I've said these things like 20 times. If you were to do a transcript of all the videos out there, you'd have a hard time knowing if it was Frank or me on some of these pieces, because he's borrowed from my chain of custody ideas.
I do the same thing. Yeah.
So we all do that, right? So now that becomes this oral tradition that's out there. And if one of us writes a book or 2 of us write a book, we're going to include the same kind of verbiage, the same kind of verbiage with how we express it. But it's because we have a common oral tradition. And what I have discovered also is that we end up speaking these things over and over and over again. So that if you were to transcribe, and I used to tease Frank about this because I've heard his I don't have enough faith to be an atheist talk. We did these fearless faith conferences. Oh my gosh. We did these, and I heard that talk so many times. I could give it the same exact. I could pause for the same jokes. If you were to line up the audio files, you would see they peak at the exact same times because we're delivering it the exact same way. Well, if you do that long enough, then you just start writing it down. Why would you think? For number one, that data stayed in my head that entire time because I've said it so many times the same way. And then when I write it down, it's going to be because the idea here is that how can I trust that this thing I saw 20 years ago could be repeat? Well, if I've been repeating it for 20 years, there's a good chance it gets to the end and is written down the way it first happened.